Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the May edition of SMAF. Forgets to mute things in his own headphones, so he's getting feedback. Good morning, good afternoon. Let's see if we can turn some of these extra streams off, and we can do the. That's the one. Cool, good. How are we all? This is your monthly roundup and catch up of all things business and technology in the world of streaming. An hour of informal conversation with your regular co-hosts, myself, Tim Siglin, Mark East, and Eric will be joining us a little bit later, and we have a couple of guests which we'll introduce as we go on. As always, I am joined by my erstwhile co-host, Tim. Tim, can I ask you to bring yourself online and bring your camera in?
There we go.
Yeah, I've got to remove the spotlight as well so we can see your beautiful face and your shaggy beard. How are you, sir?
Doing well. As you can see behind me, the world has shrunk. It no longer spans the entire length of the room. It's just up on the wall above me. I'm doing well.
More infographic like now. You've got loads of sparkly colours on that map. I don't know what they mean though.
Probably fold it up and put it in my pocket at this point. Boy, it has been a busy month. I looked at the calendar and I'm like, wait, we're already back to SMAF again. Which means we're ready for a Greeting of Streaming meeting next week as well. I really enjoyed the last one we did, the last SMAF we did, and I'm looking forward to this one as well. So Dom, neither you nor I traveled to NAB. How did you fill your time?
Watching people taking photos of awards. All I seem to see was people going, oh look, I got given a little plastic trophy, which is cool. So lots of people getting pats on backs and looking happy, which was nice, I think, and it's made me really look forward to IBC. But and it was a deluge of activity last week on LinkedIn. It was like everyone was going, oh look what I bumped into, and lots of selfies, and it's more like watching Instagram for a few days, which was kind of weird. But everyone then came back, had a day's jet lag, and then had a massive email attack on Monday and Tuesday this week, which was crazy. So it generated busyness, even though I wasn't there from my point of view. How about you?
Well, it's funny because I had done an interview with Yuri Resnick back, I guess, 5-6 months ago when their Emmys were announced. And, Yuri didn't just win one, his team won two. So he's one of the few people who could actually hold up two of them. But it was fascinating to see, JT had one, for Streaming Video Alliance and like that. I think part of what we're seeing in the industry, and I've talked to Eric about this, is 5 or 6 years ago, a streaming company winning an Emmy.
Definitely there, Tim.
Sorry. That 2 or 3 years ago, a streaming company winning an Emmy was a big deal. Now it's like, because we've sort of become the way to deliver, it's actually not nearly as big a deal.
Could you imagine a traditional broadcast linear TV channel winning an award now? I mean, it would actually be headline news, wouldn't it?
I don't know. If we go into World War III, we may all be back to rabbit ears and fuzzy on TV, but let's hope we don't get to that point. The other thing I've been doing this month is a ton of market validation. So a few of the articles that I wrote for Stream Media Sourcebook came out. I talked a little bit about Theo's HASP. I talked, of course, about Wowz's real-time streaming at scale, Millicast, Phoenix, real-time solutions, and the like. And then I've had, from that, I've had companies say, hey, will you validate our claims? And we're happy to do that because as an independent research institution, we'll take anybody's claim, put it to the test and go, yeah, that actually is a valid claim, because we want the industry never to have to question whether some company making a claim is just using that to raise funding. Not that would ever happen, in the 25 years we've been in this. And then working on State of Streaming, getting ready for Streaming Media East. So.
Yes, busy. It's the travel has started. I'm off to Boston on Monday to go to Integrated Systems Europe, then back on Tuesday, up to London on Thursday for media production, and then Boston again for Stream Media East. So yeah, busy month coming up after many
Did you
months
say
just sitting on my back.
you're going to Boston for ISE, or you're going to
Barcelona? Sorry, I think I tripped over
like,
my tongue. Yeah. No.
We'll explain how tea works over here in the U.S. once you get to Boston. So, Mark,
it's like river water.
Yeah, pretty much. Mark, you've been busy. You're sort of back at the whole movie premieres and like that. If I understand, you did a Marvel one here just recently.
Yeah, Doctor Strange 2. The red carpet was Monday, so I'm still recovering from that. And we've let's see, we did some Grammy stuff. We did an award show for Billboard. We did the Vanity Fair Oscar party. So the red carpet stuff has come back with a vengeance. We're happy to do it, but yeah, it's all of a sudden we're looking to kind of pivot back to our boots on the ground model as opposed to our virtual events model, which has sustained us for the past couple of years. So it's happening pretty abruptly.
And do you expect that you'll, as you pivot back to that you'll also still have a number of virtual events? I mean, and not necessarily talking about companies who they're afraid to send people to gather in one location, but are virtual events sort of here to stay for an extended period of time as well?
I think virtual events are here to stay for the foreseeable future, if only because it's become the standard. It's become acceptable in more use cases than it was previously. Do you know what I mean? So we've got very large media customers who are perfectly fine with bringing everybody in over Zoom and having us, create a really good looking, broadcast quality virtual event, as opposed to flying people into a studio somewhere and having them all sit on a panel. It's just not even a question. It's not on the table anymore. It's just, this is going to be a virtual event, right? Yep. Okay, let's do it. So that conversation has definitely changed over the past couple of years, and I don't see it. I don't see it, reversing at all, because the cost savings are just too great.
So just to sort of think about that for a second, the production quality of bringing people into a studio where you can control the lighting, control the audio, and that kind of thing. We all sort of jettisoned that because of the pandemic, and we sort of assumed that somebody sitting at home, their audio or video may break up. Do you think we'll reach a point where people go, wait a second, the quality hasn't increased to the point where it's studio quality, therefore we need to bring people back into the studio? Or will that only be for a very small subset of those kinds of events?
It certainly depends on the content, and if it's just talking heads, panel discussion, that sort of thing, especially if it's not involving some very high quality content. Like we've got movie studios that are reluctant to embrace a virtual event model because they want their content to be displayed in a certain manner. I think ultimately, sorry, what was the question? I've lost my train of thought.
It just basically, at what point does quality suddenly trump again? And we have to bring people back into the studio just to make sure that there are no audio or video issues.
I think to your point, the internet connectivity issues are still, something that impacts these types of events. But in terms of video and audio quality, we ship out remote kits for most of these events, and we have two different tiers of them. And the higher tier kit, you're talking about like a Blackmagic 6K camera and a prompter and lighting and the whole thing, and we control everything remotely. And it's all it's relatively easy to with some tweaking and some physical manipulation of the participant's environment, it's pretty easy to get a really great looking shot, and so a decent head mic and IFB earpiece, and you're good to go. Next thing you know, you have an insert studio in someone's house, and then it's just not an issue anymore. So
okay, let me before I come to the guests, I want to come back to Dom real quick. So Dom, you were on BBC Southeast for Greening of Streaming, you and Adam and your daughter and your cat.
Yeah. You remember
and it took me a moment when they showed one of those shots to be like, wait, that's in Dom's living room. Because obviously they lit it and all that. So for you told me though that what they came in with wasn't 6K Remy cameras from Blackmagic, it was what, iPhones?
2 iPhone 11s.
Interesting.
Edit on Final Cut Pro, job done, sent up quickly using bonded cellular in the van, which is a Vito with a small desk and a MacBook. A lot of space to carry a MacBook. Basically, it was more for the coffee maker, I think. But I had some antennas and
I knew you were going to say antennas, and all I could think about is the Monty Python cat detector van.
I mean, he carries. I know his van really well. He carries a much higher end broadcast camera, which he has to get out and dust every now and then. But generally, does the shoots now with stabilized iPhone 11 and a boom stuck on top of that. He's got 360 cameras. He's got and he's working on flying 360 cameras, so he carries a lot. He's kind of been one of the drone pioneers in the Beeb, so I kind of knew him through that channel anyway. And so he carries quite a lot of drone kit in there now. Really into the tiny little Mavic Airs because it's much less trouble in terms of licensing than the big ones. But he's very into mobile journalism, very into small portability. I'll get him on here as a guest. Actually, I think we should get him on as a guest one week.
That would be good. And I guess even to the point of the 6K cameras you're talking about, Mark, those are pretty compact cameras. So it's not like it's a Nicky that somebody's putting on sticks and having to really deal with cramped quarters. Dom's office lair is, relatively small.
Ta-da!
It looks big in this shot, Dom, but that's like 1.5 meters away. But I guess it is interesting that as the technology has shrunk and the quality has risen there, you're absolutely right. Whether it's an iPhone or a Blackmagic camera, ultimately you're putting stuff out in the field that's much higher quality than we even had a couple of years ago.
Yeah, we'll be doing the Parliament gig on June the 8th with 2 of those and an iPad. And that'll give us a 4K, so that'll be fine.
All right, let me shift our guest real quick so that we can get the conversation going. And Shraddha, I'm going to start with you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your time in the industry. And you don't need to say company names. Dom reminds me every time. Don't ask about companies.
We need to lift mute. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, absolutely. Hey everyone, I'm Shraddha. I'm the Vice President of Project Management at ViewLift. We are a go-to streaming and monetization platform, where we work with different content owners, different clients that are belonging to different industries, may it be sports, entertainment, broadcasting, news, and we publish their content, we stream their content across different applications, OTT devices, and websites. Been in this industry for a while, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here today.
Well, thank you very much for being willing to come on with us. Arianna, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for the invite. It's really nice to be here today as well. So I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering for Varnish Software. I've been in the industry for 8-9 years now. We provide a software solution to build content delivery networks. So very much like everyone else in this forum, I work very closely on projects where we need to deliver either live content or video on demand content. And of course, caching is involved, and all the infrastructure you can think of is involved as well. So I have pretty much an overview end to end, the same as Shraddha and everyone else here. So, yep.
Good. So, first of all, let me say, from a greening and streaming standpoint, Dom and I both really appreciate the way that your company stepped up, and is one of the founding members. You mentioned carbon footprint when we were sort of talking about different topics. Touch briefly on that, and then we'll have a broader conversation around that topic.
So I've seen lately the industry and the market seems to be very the industry is taking attention or paying attention to the cost of the energy and then the problem finding hardware and infrastructure, especially with the chip shortage we had and we're still having. And most importantly, given the consumption of a video and how it has grown over the last couple of years, especially with the pandemic, obviously most of the broadcasters and the company providing video, they had to grow their server availability and their footprint. And now they are at the stage where they want to shrink that back again. Basically, what they are requesting to the industries out there, they really want to use the software to gain performances which the hardware cannot give them. And that's, I suspect that's a business requirement, but that's also an environmental requirement, because it becomes expensive for the company, and it's not good for the environment as well. So there are different variables in this picture here.
So do they, when you say the hardware won't give that to them, are they replacing hardware with more powerful hardware and allowing the software to define the networking inside that, or are they using the existing devices and using the optimized software to get better performance?
The second one. So, like, imagine you work or talk to a telco provider. Mm-hmm. They probably have legacy hardware available everywhere, and perhaps these days they may be rolling out their 5G network. But whatever they roll out is there to stay for a few years.
Right.
And it's much faster and cheaper to try to squeeze performances as much as possible out from software using legacy hardware than the other way around.
Yeah, and that's music to my ears with what we do at Help Me Stream, where we take the legacy equipment and try to optimize the software in it to send to places that don't have streaming at the moment. So, Dom,
sorry, I want to just chip in there. And how, when you say legacy infrastructure, I'm very intrigued as to sort of where you would consider infrastructure legacy, or sort of what sort of aging. You know, are you working with servers that are 3 years old, 8 years old? What sort of refresh rate are you seeing in the hardware level?
Yeah, I've done a bit of everything, really, or I've seen a bit of everything. But the average is perhaps between 3 and 5 years.
3 and 5 years. So it's a sort of accountancy depreciation amounts of time.
Which is why we use 12-year-old versions, Dom, not the 3 or 5-year-old versions for us. Yeah. Interesting.
Definitely.
So, Shraddha, one of the topics that we had talked about briefly beforehand was sort of this move toward advertisement coming back into into the video space, even with subscription-based providers considering that. I like your take on it, but I want to make one comment. And my 7-year-old was incredibly frustrated the other day. She was watching a 3.5-minute music video for a song, and literally 2/3 of the way through it, blasting at twice the decibel level, was this commercial that had nothing to do with the music video. You know, I get it in a 30-minute piece, but in a 3.5-minute piece to have YouTube shove a non-relevant to a 7-year-old commercial in it, just sort of frustrates me to no end. Or will that become the norm, or is there a sanity that we'll get to with advertising? And I know, Dom, you don't have advertising.
Oh no, ban advertising altogether. It should never be allowed.
But Shraddha, your take.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in my opinion, right, I personally have seen and I think that there is a huge content catalog. I mean, as we all know, content is going to be the king ever, because there are so many, production houses, may it be a small scale, may it be a large scale. They are producing a lot of shows, original shows, there are independent movies, and there are, these small competitors that are in the market who, wants to get their content out on, different platforms, right? For them to start with, a simple application as, iOS or Android, and then, moving over to those OTT devices, right? So every, in my opinion, I think subscription is really good when you have really solid content and when you have that user retention with you to charge for something that, you're creating it like, beautifully. But I think the business model, I believe that would really help in general would be a hybrid one where, you have a subscription, but you also have this ad-based concept. And I personally don't mind, watching an ad. But again, as you said, I'm not like, if it is a short video of 2 minutes, I don't want to see an ad in that. Obviously, if it's a 30-minute video and if there is a pre-roll and a mid-roll, I'm sure I'm fine with that. If that comes with a lower cost, a cheaper price, I'm game for it. So I think, as long as the content is good, the quality of the production is good, I'm more than happy to, buy into this hybrid model. And if needed, solely a ad-based model as well. But I think that's where, our technology would slowly evolve, and all this, big, content creators or the content streaming apps would start thinking in this direction. That's what, I personally, observe and, have been noticing, over the last couple of years now. But, that's what I think.
So, we've got established players who are thinking about advertising. We all know Netflix, is potentially looking at that. But let's take it to the other end. Let's talk about smaller niche content, say for a particular country as opposed to globally. If a service launches, and they say, we're going to start with FAST, we're going to have free advertising supported television, linear for lack of a better term, is there a point at which they will never then be able to get to subscription? Because it seems like subscription, as you say, works for premium content, but if even the premium content companies are having conversations around also throwing ads in, does it allow small niche players who might say, look, we can start with a fast model, but we'd like to eventually get to consistent subscriber revenue? Is there still an opening in the market for that kind of a model?
Yeah, I would think so, Tim, definitely, because once again, in my personal experience, right, if I love a streaming service, I'm going to be dedicated to that service, right? And if I feel that they are producing good content, they are streaming good content, which I would like to watch, maybe the first episode is free or the first season is free, but I'm really interested to see what happens next. Yeah, I'm more than happy to pay for that particular price, which is not like humongous, but which is in a nominal way, and I'm more than happy to gear towards it. But I personally think, yeah, the market is going towards this hybrid model, and eventually we'll see more and more streaming services getting into this rhythm sooner rather than later.
So Dom, I sort of joke about the advertising piece with you, and you've been very clear that your kids have not been exposed to that. Given the fact that we're doing all this stuff online now, is it inevitable that I understand your kids are a little older, but is it inevitable that this generation is going to get exposed to advertising in a way globally that those of us in the US just take as second nature, but places like the UK, sort of frown on heavily?
So I think it'd be naive to say my kids haven't seen any adverts at all, but we dominantly watch we dominantly have Disney and Netflix precisely because they don't have advertising, and we don't watch any content. We just typically don't, as a family, watch any content which has adverts, advert breaks, advert rolls. YouTube probably being the one exception, but I can't remember a time an advert was ever left to play. Skip out every three instantaneously. There's no tolerance for it. I think that I've gone on about this on many SMAFs. The big challenge I have with ad-supported services sort of becoming dominant and subscriber models not being able to hold their place because there's just an expectation. There's no expectation, if you like. Is that I think your free content tends to become available and becomes accessible for some quite dodgy practices from advertisers and some quite bad practices in terms of use of data about audiences. And I think that feedback loop therefore exposes people who can't afford subscription services, and it creates a class divide. And I think that people who are exposed to advertising, especially people who just don't question it and go, well, isn't it inevitable if we want this stuff, without any question, I think that can cause I think that will over time cause sociological problems. I think cheap free-to-air mad nonsense news feeds or mad nonsense heavily commercial product placement and so on through advertising does open up poorer communities to being manipulated by advertisers in a way that subscribers can opt out of, frankly. And it's something that we need to be able to ask ourselves, because lots of cultures just go, advertising, let's accept it because we get stuff for free, but it's not for free, you're the product. And that's a problem.
So Arianna, Mark, any further thoughts on that before we go on to the next topic?
Go ahead.
I was just saying, I was wondering why we need advertisement, and it's obviously because there is a lot of concurrency and the competition right now in the market, and the price of delivery prices have increased, and how can we beat that? The only answer I have right now is that the only way to get rid of advertisement will be to give the end viewers an optimal quality of experience. How do we do that? I'm gonna just throw edge computing, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and then someone else can take
nicely
that.
Done.
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Well, that sounds like a dumb Robinson topic.
Go for it, Mark. Your turn.
Yeah. Machine learning ain't my bag, man. No, I was gonna mention that, if the stark difference, Tim, between, let's say, YouTube and YouTube Kids, for example. I mean, there are, differing ad policies on those two platforms that are both sustainable, that both allow, content creators to provide content for YouTube and YouTube Kids with differing levels of ad revenue, and they both work. I mean, Pink Fong and all these, the companies that do nothing but children's programming, and for whom YouTube Kids is a huge outlet, aren't complaining about their ad revenues at this point. So the question, it begs the question: why are the more aggressive ad models, like you're talking about, with a ad inserted into a 3-minute music video? Why are those necessary? On the very same platform.
Well, and what's interesting is those commercials are accompanied by the little, if you don't want to see these ads, you can sign up for, a subscription service, essentially.
Sure.
I do find that more than ironic. So Shraddha, you work with a number of different platforms, as you say, iOS, Android, I'm assuming Mac OS, Windows, and then the OTT devices. Are there some OTT devices, and I'm just thinking aloud here, because I'm thinking, if I go to watch something with YouTube on my Apple TV, I'm sitting across the room, I don't have the volume remote with me, and I have to jump up to go over and turn it down. Where if I'm on a Android device, I can just, turn the volume down with my thumb right next to where I'm holding it. Are there some OTT devices that get less advertising sent to them, or is it sort of consistent across the device types?
I think it can be consistent across different device types, but so for example, I'm just saying, Apple TV may have more traction of having advertisement as compared to a Fire Stick, right? But I think it's more or less for the client to decide, because they are eventually going to surface these different ad tags across their content. So they would target based on how they are viewing their user consumption of any content. Okay, fine, Fire TV is going to have a lot of content, let me push more and more ad towards Fire TV. So it depends upon the client's perspective or their analysis as well, but more or less it is a decision that a strategist has to make based on the reports that they see.
Right. Well, I think about how Apple does. If you buy an Apple device, you get another 4 months of Apple TV for free. So, if you keep buying Apple devices, you get that for free. I almost wonder if there's a model down the line as these ecosystems become more sophisticated that Apple could essentially say, you can pay an extra $30 for this Apple TV, and we'll feed that out to all the advertisers and guarantee that you won't have ads for the next 90 days. Would I pay for that? Yeah, probably I would. But obviously you can't do it on a platform like, say, Roku, which is agnostic to the ecosystems, but you could potentially do it on an ecosystem device like an Amazon Fire Stick or an Apple TV. So, Dom, you want to?
It's all over, Tim. Sorry, Shraddha, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that's a brilliant idea. I mean, if that happens, that would be amazing.
I was going to pitch Dom to go ahead and take that and run with it.
It's all over, Tim. It's all over. You saw Netflix has reached peak subscribers. That's it. Everyone's pulling their money out. They're closing down all the subscriber businesses. It's all going to be free to air, ad supported. So expect a lot of McDonald's adverts, folks.
So Dom, why do you think 200,000 subscribers, which was not that they lost subscribers, they just didn't grow as fast? If you go read the actual numbers, is it just a correction that Netflix price was way over the top, or is it?
I think it's a herd of financial markets going, what's the next sexy thing after the pandemic?
Okay.
I think it's a fickle market out there. Digital streaming's been huge for the last 8 years. It broke through with the last 2 years in particular and became mega. Everyone's gone in and put their funding in on the big runners, and the big runners can only grow so far. There's only so many wheels, there's only so much oil, and there's only so much subscriber TV that people want. So at a certain point, it'll reach a bit of saturation and it'll course correct. Maybe they could have gone, the pandemic's going to be over next quarter and we're going to lose some subscribers, and the investors wouldn't have been spooked. But at the end of the day, I think that's a pretty tough call. I'm not sure anyone expected the last few months of change. So I think it's just the herd going, where's the next big thing? Let's pull some money out. We've done quite well. It'll recover. I certainly don't think Netflix has done anything wrong. They're still delivering however many hundreds of millions of subscribers, and if you look at it as a success case, that's a massive market. They've got a long way to fall.
Well, and obviously they've raised prices recently. Disney's raised prices recently. It'd be interesting to see the numbers, to see what the offset was on we lost 200,000 subscribers, but we got an extra $1.50 from every other subscriber out there. Did that offset the fall of the stock, so they could say, okay, now we can just go do a stock buyback and sort of push our stock price back up? But I agree with you. I sort of think it's the financial tea leaves of, we all assume that after the pandemic, not as many people will be watching streaming content, but 200,000 out of over 100 million subscribers is a very, very small amount.
It's funny, because I don't invest in stocks, and I don't, we're not courting VCs at the moment. I do tend to remain just focused on that figure. Between the two behemoths, Netflix and Disney, it's nearly 250 million subscriptions, not subscribers. That's unfair to call it subscribers, but subscriptions. I mean, Mark, go back to 1998. Right, you're going to launch a service on Friday with 250 million people using it. How does that make you feel?
An impossibility in 1998, right?
Right, exactly. So I think we've come a long way, and I don't really care what the financial markets say. They can go and play with something else, but I think the streaming industry deserves a pat on the back. So they've got a long way to. There's 200,000 subscribers going out in the sun for a bit. Doesn't really worry me at all.
But is that the reason, though? Are they going out in the sun? That's the question.
Correct.
The other thing to take into consideration here is that along with the increase in number of viewers for streaming services for scripted content like Netflix, like Apple TV Plus, like Disney Plus, there were a number of advancements in the field of, we'll call it unscripted live streaming content, where people are having discussions much like this one in one form or another. And that's how you spend your evening, as opposed to, flipping on the the tube and watching something on Netflix. So that was another impact of the pandemic that is not to be discounted here. I think a lot of people have switched off of the passive content, the passive scripted content, and are moving towards a more interactive model.
I've been watching synopsis of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial by Johnny Depp fans who have been doing brilliant cuts. But what I got was essentially a 3-day testimony synopsized down into about 7.5 minutes. And I got most of the main points on that. So that's as entertaining to me as watching yet another Jack Sparrow, equivalent Pirates of the Caribbean. So
I'm waiting for all the TikTokers to learn proper sign language, and then we can watch this sort of TikTok language communicating these synopsis without having to have the sound on. It'd be brilliant.
That's probably another idea to take to the market, Dom. So, sort of reminds me when I was in high school, in our A-levels equivalent. 2 of my friends actually did sign language interpretation at their church, so they could sit in class and actually pass test answers back and forth. So the teacher had to enforce a no communicating as opposed to no talking, because they literally could just do this and an answer was passed across the room. And you're like, that's brilliant. How can that be? Anyway. All right. So next topic, and sort of going back to what we talked about with Arianna, power consumption across the board. So Dom, carbon footprint, apparently Ireland's now saying that data centers consume more power in Ireland than residential houses do in aggregate. Ireland's obviously a fairly large data center location for Europe. Obviously you've got 2 in the UK and 1 in Amsterdam and a couple other major places. With all the concerns about power consumption in Europe, including around the war, do you have a general sense that what Ireland's announcing will sort of be consistent throughout the rest of Europe in the not too distant future, that residential power consumption will essentially be dwarfed by data centers, or is Ireland an outlier? And I ask that sitting here in America, not really knowing the nuances necessarily.
I go back to putting my green and streaming hat firmly on and go, I think we need much more information before we jump to these conclusions. I think the experience I've had of all the claims that came out over the last 2-3 years about streaming and drilling into them and asking some really tough questions has revealed to me that they are lab experiments which have been extrapolated, and they need much more granularization and much more real world data, which is what we're focusing on with Greedy and Streaming, is getting the instrumentation out there. Varnish and others are actively getting into this program of going, right, let's try to really provide the scientists with some real world measurement rather than extrapolate this from one server which was tested in 2014 or whatever it may be. So when it comes to this data center versus residential, I just want to ask so many questions before I could comment on that. What time of day, what power supply is being used? What are we calling a data center here? Are we including micro data centers, green boxes in the street that are attached to telcos, telephone exchanges? It's not. I haven't seen the article, so it just makes me want to ask questions at that level.
Well, and I think that's important. Obviously, you've got the parliamentary event coming up in June. Obviously, politicians will read those kinds of topics and say, "Wait a second, this is either a huge warning sign or a huge opportunity, depending on what part of the construct they sit in." I find it interesting that, as Arianna is saying, carbon footprint is beginning to be part of the conversation. Shraddha, from your standpoint, do you hear companies that you work with saying, how can we be carbon neutral, or are they more concerned with how can we grow to get to a point where we can even be concerned about, being at such a scale that we would need to start thinking about power consumption?
Yeah, that's the latter one, because for them it's acquisition, retention, and then once they are into that market, that's when I think the next step would be the carbon footprint. But yeah, I mean, I've seen more first, the latter part of it, and I'm hoping that eventually everyone will lead this way, because it's a serious thought to think about. Yeah.
So, Arianna, from an edge compute standpoint, you mentioned edge compute and machine learning and AI. Do we see that there's a carbon benefit to the edge compute model as opposed to just growing much bigger data centers, or is it much more a convenience factor to have, the edge compute model in place?
I need to throw a challenge before we can continue. Can any of you define what edge computing is?
Good one.
Dom, you take a stab at it, and then I'll.
So I think of the CDNs as being the first distributed edge computing environments. Rather than having switchgear in an exchange or routers in an exchange, I think of having a CPU with some sort of dynamic layer 4 application that you can change. And so if you can run that at the deep remote edge of your network close to the access point, then I think you can start to call things edge computing environments. I hasten to say that certainly in fiber networks, most edge computing is actually still in what I would consider the core of the network. Right. So even RANs and mobile networks, they're deploying SDN through to their switchgear in the mast, but actually they're not running computers in the mast. They're running it in the core of the node B or back at the peering point in the exchange. And so the edge depends on the edge of the autonomous system that you're managing, if you're going to be puritanical about it. But there you go.
And I'm so old school that, having done work in the telecom space, I look at it as central office versus SLIC versus pedestal. The pedestal in the neighborhood would be where the edge compute would sit. The mid computing would sit at the SLIC, and obviously the main part of your storage and processing would sit back at the central office.
Yeah, I overall agree, although it's not clear, at least it's not clear to me, what exactly the expected outcome should be, other than we just sit closer to end users, which makes sense, because then you, at least from a content delivery standpoint, it makes a lot of sense, because you reduce the latency and improve quality of experience and monetize around that. Mm-hmm. But computational wise, because that's where it will become more expensive and also much more problematic for the carbon footprint. I don't think there is a unique or anything agreed by the big players on what edge computing should be, and that's where we first need to understand what we expect from edge computing, and then we can move to the next phase of how do we optimize that, how do we reduce the carbon footprint.
Absolutely agree with you, and I really do. It's really good to hear you saying that as well, because I think for me, at a very pure level, a COTS computer that you could do anything on starts to become a differentiated thing from a switch, which has typically an ASIC or some sort of dedicated purpose. So if you're talking the availability of COTS to run different applications, a compute, if you like, an EC2, but with the box, with the capability to run your application at a mast or at a remote or a deeply remote location, like a CATV termination or whatever it may be. It's a really interesting architectural idea, and something that plays into the telcos SDN and SD-WAN strategies, but the telcos don't understand layer 4 at all. It's not their space, and they want to invite edge computing in because it looks like a revenue generator and a way to sell some capacity, but it's not their space at all. They don't get beyond layer 2 switching, and that's where they want to stay. That's why the telcos are starting to divest of their media interest. BT's sold off BT Sport. I'm sure Vision will probably become its own thing in time. That's just me conjecturing. But AT&T long ago went, it's not really our space. We'll have little dabbles and then we'll get back out of it. So the PTTs are like to dabble and try to invigorate the markets. And I think edge computing is that. I haven't yet seen the killer app for edge computing. I haven't yet seen the thing that needs latency down at 10 milliseconds. There's nothing in an IP domain that I've seen that demands that. Maybe financial data, but that's so well serviced with other telco services, which were usually already deployed on the fibers before the IP services were. That I still haven't seen anything that really nails the edge compute argument.
Well, and interestingly, Dom, when you talk about the revenue stream, most of the wireless carriers here in the States, they don't own the tower. They don't own the fiber that goes to the tower. They lease both of those. They may own the antennas that sit on the tower, but at the end of the day, their backhaul, is across the leased line. And so from a revenue standpoint for them, it would seem like it's okay, fine, if we can populate you at the base of the mast, we can cover the cost of what we're paying for the mast and what we're paying for the pipe, the backhaul pipe, and maybe that ultimately is where then they have a lower cost point. I guess my question is, to a certain extent, we're almost having the same conversation we had 18 years ago with Limelight versus Akamai, network CDN at the core versus CDN at a whole bunch of POPs, which you could call edge computing these days. The killer app for the POPs was on-demand content cached there. As you say, live, although we could implement multicast a lot easier across those networks now than we could back in the day. You're right. That was an on-demand conversation back then as opposed to a live conversation. And have we reached the point where we're saying edge computing is just another conversation, but from a live standpoint as opposed to a VOD?
I'd venture that it might be embedded computing in telecoms rebranded. Okay. I think that there's some sense that there's these microservices which you can deploy deep into the edge of the network, and therefore they'll give you benefit by being able to run remotely at the edge of the network. I think services that make sense in that environment that I've seen have been server-side ad insertion that's localized server-side ad insertion that's by cache. That can make some sense. But actually being right at the edge or being at the core of the edge, if you see what I mean, it doesn't make any difference. I think being deep at the edge, the Amazon wavelength sort of model of being in the RAN or in the mast, I'm not sold on that yet. I just can't see anything apart from some machine to machine in factory, maybe. I don't know. There's nothing that's really blown me away.
And I noticed that you posted here in the chat that Mark DeYoung, of course, said, if we're talking about the definition of edge and CDN and multi-CDN, hybrid CDN, it's time for a CDN glossary. And of course, he's running CDN Alliance, and that will be one of their tasks, their working group one equivalent to our greening of streaming. So, all right, we're coming down to, let's see, we've got about 10 minutes left. Did anybody here? I was hoping Eric would come back on, but did anybody?
Yeah, we were going to hit NAB up, weren't we? If Eric
I was going to ask if anybody else had gone to NAB. Shraddha, Arianna, did you all go? Okay. We've got Streaming Media East coming up in about 2.5 weeks, and Dom, you said you're going to ISE.
Yeah.
Mark, we've talked before about, sort of you're busy enough that maybe events don't make sense, but do you have any events on the horizon that you're sort of looking towards?
It's not so much being busy, it's the fact that the risk reward ratio just isn't quite back where it needs to be for me yet. I've got, my folks are in their 80s, my kids are unvaccinated, etc. So it really needs to be something that's has a lot of return on investment for me to go stand in a giant building full of international travelers for 4 days. You know what I mean? So not this year, maybe next year, we hope.
And you're outloading during the movie premiere, so you're not going in the giant building of.
Right. Now, I mean, there's some return on investment there. I will go see a movie for sure, depending on the crowd. But yeah, seriously, being shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of people who just got off a plane from some other country, nope. I'll pass on that for the next 12 months. I'll continue to pass on that. And the other thing is, it didn't seem like anyone. And not anyone, but I knew a few people who were going to NAB. The crowd certainly wasn't going to be at capacity. The announcements weren't, very promising, that sort of thing. There wasn't. We thought Blackmagic was going to maybe release a new camera. That didn't happen. There were some, smaller players who released some exciting stuff like Bird Dog, for example, some very cool stuff there. But it was really, kind of a pretty boring show when it comes down to it. And, a lot of the reason I go is for dinners and cocktail parties and things like that. And a lot of that wasn't happening either. So maybe next year. Yeah.
Arianna, do you have an event on the horizon, or have you had an event recently that you've gone to?
Well, the first biggest one I will go to is IBC in September in Europe.
Sure.
I'm not sure how that will really turn out to be honest. Hopefully better than NAB, because I from my team I got exactly the same feedback Mark gave. It was really quiet, good to be back, but still a quiet event. And no real networking events afterwards. Yeah, interesting players, interesting companies, and all of that, but definitely not the NAB we had pre-pandemic.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I heard was essentially vendors got to catch up with other vendors or people who been in their company who went to work at other companies.
So Robert's just chipped in. He was at NAB, said it was nice in its smaller audience size, more quality time with the right people, which actually bodes really well for Streaming Media East. I've had a sense that Streaming Media East is going to be a bit of a vintage this year, because I think it's got that buzz, but it's small enough that there's going to be a chance to really properly catch up with people over 3 days. And actually not have to try and find them, which is kind of cool. So I think that adds a bit of edge to it.
Well, and it's also a new city for Stream Media East, because it's traditionally been at the Hilton in New York, and it's at the Copley in my home away from home in Boston for a year when I worked in Cambridge. So I'll feel right at home. But
are you going to be hiding from the bar tab though? Are you?
So it's funny. Because I stayed there so frequently, I walk in one day and the lobby was just absolutely full of people in baseball uniforms. And I'm like, what's this? And they're like, oh, the All-Star games happening at Wrigley, because they have a replica of the green machine. I'm like, that's cool. But then that meant that I had to dodge hundreds of people trying to get autographs from ball players who were staying at the hotel. So anyway, Shraddha,
we tried to leave them with cricket, but they got really confused.
Yeah, speaking of long events where you can plug in a whole lot of commercials,
you're right. We're talking
of cricket. But anyway, so Shraddha, what about you from an event standpoint?
Not me, but my team is heading to IBC for sure. Again, coming up in September. My team again went to NAB. I think more or less it's a similar feedback, but it was good to see, everyone like prospective clients, existing clients come along, catch up on, quite a lot of things, see what's happening, especially after the, pandemic. So yeah, it was, I'm sure it was a good one. And looking forward, team going at IBC soon. Yeah.
Okay. One other piece of feedback I got was that it seemed like companies who'd signed up for 2020 spots, because 2019, of course, was the last NAB, were essentially told, look, if you want to hold your position, you need to go ahead and come put a booth in place here. That.
How's the just as a general question across the board of all four of you, how's the COVID vibe at the moment in each of your respective areas? Because I would venture that where I am, there's just about 2 people I know who are taking any precautions at all. It seems to have completely gone. It was yesterday's news now here. and I just wonder how that is in your parts of the world.
I think we've shifted to an endemic model as opposed to a pandemic model. There's an unprecedented number of people in my personal sphere who have active COVID right now, and it's amounted to some sniffles and a cough, and no one is wearing masks as a result. So, I think that anecdotally, everyone's still, catching it, being diagnosed with it, et cetera, et cetera. No one's really suffering much from it. And so I think everyone's pretty much done with the stringent precautions. That said, we were still all masks and plexiglass dividers in the broadcast truck the other day. So it's, your mileage may vary.
Close quarters, yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Here, Dom, our lockdowns lifted in 3 months after I got married, and hardly anybody wears a mask in Tennessee. It's just like, it is what it is. So when we hear California has had its, restrictions lifted, we're like, oh yeah, we did that a couple of years ago. That's sort of the mentality. I think the biggest difference is now not being required to wear masks on planes and public transportation, where it had been a absolute mandate up until 2 weeks ago when a lawsuit, went through the courts. So,
how about Shraddha, Arianna?
Out here in New York, New Jersey, in fact, today is my 7th day. So I was
really?
Yeah. So my son, he goes to day school, and that's where I'm assuming that's how he got it. He's 3 years old. I got it. My husband got it. My husband is like 2 days behind the schedule. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of catching up. But then again, there are no CDC regulations as such to put the mask on. The restaurants are running at full capacity. The theaters are back in. But I've seen quite a few cases out here in New York and New Jersey for sure.
Arianna, how about you?
Italy is perhaps seeing one of the very few countries in Europe keeping some of the restrictions. Very limited though. For example, wearing mask in closed forums or the cinemas and things like that. But if I'm not mistaken, all of these will all of these restrictions will likely drop end of May, especially with the warm weather coming up and all of that. But again, same as Mark, all the people I heard from with COVID, it's really just the flu, thankfully. So yeah.
And Italy got hit especially hard early on, so it would make sense from that cautionary standpoint. May is also perfect for the fact that your tourist season kicks in significantly in June, and having people come from multiple countries, to Italy to visit where they have varying levels of restrictions or non-restrictions. That adds a whole nother wrinkle to it, because you end your restrictions just as Mark was saying, a whole bunch of foreigners show up and bring with them whatever they have. So
I've got to say, over here everyone had it, and now I think you do see some of the over 80s and so on wearing masks on the bus, and I tend to still stick a mask on when I'm in a place full of smelly people, because since the pandemic I've become so much more conscious of how unwashed the general public are, and a mask tends to help with that. So and CCTV as well when I'm being dodgy, but we've come up against the hour, Tim.
We have. So just really quickly, let's talk about, because I know Eric's not on here, Streaming Media East is coming up, as we mentioned. There's the State of Streaming survey, which Michelle and I are responsible for generating the data from. So if anybody's not taken the State of Streaming survey, they can. And oh, by the way, one of the topics we were going to talk about was metaverse, and Mark asked how you get there. If you take the State of Streaming survey and you leave your email address, you're registered to win an Oculus 2. And that apparently is what allows you to actually get into the metaverse, where it never rains and everything is blooming. And Mark apparently already has one, so why he's asking us where.
Mark lives in San Diego. That is the metaverse. If you've been wondering, it's San Diego. That's the digitized version of San Diego. So
No, you need to
I
spotlight.
don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean?
Oh, there you are, Mark. Now I can see you in reality.
Where are you? I don't see you.
Excellent. We're behind you. We're behind you. Turn around.
Yeah, right.
Oh, there you are.
Listen, can I just before we thank the guests, can I just say thanks to a very active chat room tonight? I think the LinkedIn restream feed is starting to settle down and work. And it was nice to see the community from LinkedIn diving in. So thanks for all the chip-ins and comments on the LinkedIn feed, folks. Do subscribe and share the news about SMAF. We are going to have a fiddle with the format, I think, over the next month or two, poking Mark when he gets time away from the the Marvel boys and all those sort of lesser important things than SMAF. So we're going to have a play, and we might try and get everybody back together for the 5th anniversary, which is coming up in a couple of months. So Shraddha, Arianna, we look forward to inviting you back on for that as well. But Tim, why don't you take us all out formally?
I was just going to say, Shraddha, thank you very much for your insights. Always good to talk to somebody who sort of works the soup to nuts part of the content delivery side. And Arianna, given what you do to help make sure the content gets there when it needs to get there, thank you very much for your perspective on things. Mark, go watch a movie sometime here in the next couple of days, because as you said, you're hearing Doctor Strange and the Multiverse is actually a really good movie. I'll probably
my list of must-watch movies is increasing by the day. They're starting to pile up finally.
Tuesdays, which gives me the senior citizen discount of $5 movies. So I won't watch it on opening weekend, but I'll be certain to be there on Tuesday. And Don, watch an advertisement from time to time. Some of them are really actually pretty funny.
Well, I'll be making some adverts for ideas. So, how do you do that? I'm not very good at YouTube. There we go. Some adverts for ideas without mentioning it. And maybe I'll watch those because I'm sort of into wearing my own brand and that sort of narcissism. So, anyway, right, enough. That's May for you folks. We'll see you next month. And once again, thanks Tim and Eric in his absentia, and to Arianna and Shraddha. Once again, thank you very much. I'm going to press the go button. See you later. Bye.